Welcome to Faith in Media. I'm delighted today to be with our guest, Thomas Cozens. Thomas, thank you so much for being with us at Faith in Media. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Carla. Very well indeed. It's beautiful and sunny in Camden, and this isn't a sales ploy, but I have the best coffee in Camden. The good news, it is really, really good.
People are going to be up in arms for such claims, Tom, and we've just started the conversation, so we shall see how that pans out. I love that so much. There is no sunshine here. I'm in the Berkshire area, which is, I'm a bit envious that you've got sunshine, but hey, I do love autumn. It's going to that crispy cold, but there is still some sunshine, which is great because I can't deal with the rain. But anyway, enough about weather. Tell us a little bit about you, the things that you do. I think that will be super helpful.
Great. And Carla, can I just say, so great to be here with you. And we had a super fun conversation before this started. Yeah. Lots of secrets were revealed that no one will ever hear of. Sorry, guys.
I will hold you to that.
But my secrets, don't worry, Carla has none. I have all the secrets. So what do I do? This is a really good question. So I currently run a film studio called Owl in Space, like owl in space. I also run a charity called Thought Shorts, and my company does three things. So number one, numero uno, we do commercial work, and that's with anything from finance companies all the way to Christian organizations. But what links all of those projects together is this desire to do research-driven creative. What do I mean by that? I think definitely to use the popular term, in a post-truth era, trying to create things which are true, trying to create things which are honest. And I think as a commercial proposition, not necessarily just selling products, but selling a standard. So I really love working with organizations that want to set a standard in their industry, call people to a higher thing, whether that's talking about environmental stuff, whether that's talking about using advanced technology in the right way. I'm really passionate about working with organizations that have that vision to sell much more than just a product. They want to sell a vision, a standard in their industry. And so that's the first area. That's a commercial area. The second is that we work with social media organizations to produce film and media, which talks about the intersection of contemporary topics and God stuff. So we might take a contemporary topic and then raise the theological or philosophical questions inherent within that topic. And those films can range all the way from kind of implicitly talking about biblical themes all the way up to explicitly, expositing a bit of the Bible. And I really love being able to work across that range in that space. That's digital and social media. And then the final thing is that we work in prestige media as well. So we do radio work. I've done radio work with the BBC. We do film and TV stuff as well. And we just released a short called The Virtual Llama, which has got distributed by Omeletto, which is really fun because they're amazing. They're the biggest short film distributor in the world. And that was an absolute dream. And it talks about the theme of embodiment and virtual reality, which is particularly pertinent at Christmas when we think about the incarnation and how God became embodied. Kind of cool. So I really love doing all of that work. And Thought Shorts is a charity that we set up in over the last year and a half. And that's been funding a lot of these social media projects that we're doing. And progressively more the prestige media, because as you're probably well aware, Carla, that stuff is much more expensive.
It is.
So getting into that space is a different can of worms or bucket of eggs or whatever metaphor.
This is absolutely fascinating. And I love hearing about your range of all the things that you do, Tom. And I think my question to begin with is like, how did you get there? You've got an engineering background, journeying and starting at Cambridge, to philosophy at Oxford, and now into the creative arts. How did that all come together for you? That sounds like it must have been an epic journey, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Thanks, Carla. That is a for me a really big question, because I think retrospectively I can see why I'm here, but honestly, in the earlier years of my 20s, it really didn't make much sense to me. And the Lord has done a remarkable work in bringing me to the place where I wake up every morning and I feel like I want to get up, I want to do the work that I've got before me, and I actually enjoy it and feel good at it as well, which wasn't always the case. And so I wouldn't want to get into a sermon about finding your path, but there's definitely something there that I struggled with for a while. So very briefly, became a Christian when I was about 12, or maybe the commitment when I was about 12. Had some interesting school years where I think it was an era where a lot of kids were kind of either losing faith or didn't have any faith at all. So I was one of very few Christians in my school, and perhaps one of only one who actually talked about their faith in a public way. And I think my conversion was quite dramatic, and felt like I wanted to tell everyone about it. And it created some very interesting drama at school. And I learned a lot of lessons there about how people perceive God, and how to and not to talk about God. I think at the age of 18, I went off to Liberia for a while. I was working with mercy ships. They're amazing. There was a bit of a journey there as well, because I had the perfect gap year plan where I was going to build a school in Latin America. I'm not saying building schools in Latin America is a bad idea, but I thought it was a perfect gap year plan, and God had very different plans. I ended up doing engineering on mercy ships, and I was a medical sterilizer as well, which is especially when you're dealing with tumors the size of your face on your face, it is a incredible and grim job. And I think engineering, 10 decks below the surface, it was a wild ride, and it was also in Liberia, so this was just post Civil War. So I saw a lot of death, and I saw a lot of how faith is lived out in contexts which aren't, frankly, white suburbia, which is where I grew up. And I think it irreparably changed me. I think I love that period of my life, and whilst I was out there, got the offer to do engineering at Cambridge. I came home, did 4 years at Cambridge, which were pretty interesting years. Again, really forced me to struggle with intellectual elements of my faith. I remember getting stood up in front of lecture halls because I was a Christian, and they would then ask me how I could possibly believe the world was created in 7 days. To which, I would say, well, number one, I don't. Two, that's a much longer conversation again. But my bioengineering professor. I would love to dig into that. But my bioengineering professor was a very staunch atheist. It was the time of new atheism when I was studying.
Wow.
So, at the height of new atheism. So there was a really interesting debates I had with my mates. I think I learned a lot there about how to intellectually engage with questions of faith, and where transformation actually occurs. So where people actually make changes in their lives. And spoiler alert, I don't think it's solely rigorous intellectual debate about whether the world is created in 7 days or not.
I'm so glad that you said that. I don't, just before you move on, sorry to interrupt there, because I think this is such an important moment. I love that you shared that, you were in a position to really engage with some intellectual questions. Do you feel like, I think particularly in maybe just a lot of our, common circles within Christianity or churches and communities now, in our suburban life, as I'll say, as we're living in the Western world right now, that is there enough rigor that we're engaging with as Christians? Are we sufficiently coming to the table to engage with those that are not subscribing to the faith yet, that have not encountered God yet? Are we doing a good enough job? You encountered that front row, up front and center, in probably the thick of it. And I can imagine quite daunting prospects when you are someone who is on your journey towards learning, and you're faced with some staunch, as you said, your professor, and potentially some other really staunch beliefs that have come geared with all of their experience and their life, and they're coming in opposition. Do you think that we're doing a good job of that? You experienced that firsthand. Should we be doing more of that, I think, is my question.
Yes and no. Okay, so I guess this kind of comes full circle back to why I do what I do now.
Yeah.
But as a starting point, I would say, yes, we should be doing more, and I think that is always a truth to some degree. There is the Great Commission is magnanimous. It is huge, and we never quite live up to it, right? It's but simultaneously, I'm aware that I think many church folks feel burnt out and like they want to retreat into their lovely church castles and hang out there because the world is a scary place. And I think there's both a comfort and a challenge that Christ's grace is sufficient, and ultimately God is the one that does the transformation in people's hearts. So we go out into the world in that knowledge and that strength, knowing that it's not about burning ourselves out. God doesn't want us to burn ourselves out. And there's no wonder there's so many famous Christian speakers talking about God's heart. I think it's Matthew 11. But talking about how he's gentle and lowly, right? That brilliant book if you've got round to it. I think there's a real need to feel God's peace, especially when the world is moving so quickly. And it feels like there's this constant itch to do things.
Yes.
So I think yes and no. I would want to say it's God's strength. So chill, have your peace. One of my friends, a great guy called Rupesh Patel, who runs a company called Good Things, says, be calm and confident Christians. And I like that. I like that idea. But also be spurred on and motivated by the Great Commission. There's a lot to do, a lot of really exciting things to do, seeing people's lives transformed. Seeing people saved is incredible. And so both and. But yes, there is more we could be doing. I could talk about what the more could be, and of course it's my opinion. That may come later, or I could do that now.
I definitely interrupted. So that was my fault. I just didn't want to lose that moment, because I thought that was such a powerful thing as a young man, as a strong Christian in that environment. That could not have been easy, but yet clearly you had either just you were the right person at the right time for that moment, and I imagine many were impacted by your conversation, even that season of your life. And just what that was like for you. I think that was just really powerful, and how that's kind of really framed. You clearly have a passion for what you're doing through the storytelling of your charity, your company, the creative elements of it. But we started this question about what's your journey been like from engineering, science is a background there, philosophy, and now you're here in this really creative space. So it's lovely to hear some more about how just that journey is kind of framed the storytelling journey that you now have. I would wanted to know, just in terms of, when did this click into place for you? I think after coming through all of that.
I would say that so the first batch of university engineering, I did my master's there as well in engineering. That was an intellectual renewal, but I think later on, especially end of my degree, master's, I think I came to realize that intellectual debate was only one mode, or only one part of seeing people's lives transformed. And I think it's really important that in that debate space, when you're standing up, you have the opportunity. It's great to be able to give a defense that you have. And I think it's really important that I think especially the younger generation can see that there is intellectual rigor to believing in God. I think it's very tempting in that space to try and be right. At the cost of actually truly answering someone's question. So it's very easy to straw man I think we do that a lot. So we kind of create these fictional ideas of what atheism or agnosticism actually are, and straw man them in order to make our lives easier. Because truly, the questions that they're often asking are very difficult. They're complex questions that don't have easy answers. And it's easier for us to say, that's a silly question, isn't it? But people are honestly asking these questions. And I think giving them the space and honoring the question and the questioner is a really good thing. I think
that's really good.
If I could very briefly jump into so the next two phases were post engineering. So whilst I was studying engineering, I probably studied more philosophy and theology than I did engineering. I was more interested in that stuff. I was very involved in church, and then at the end, I was offered a job to work at my church as working with students. So did that for 2 years, and that was an absolute joy. Getting to hang out with people, hear their stories, especially after 4 years of intellectual brain battery, was really good. And I think definitely formed my deep interest in theology and philosophy. So I did 1 year with the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics, which we could talk about that at length, because there's obviously been some drama in recent years. But I did a year there where I also studied theology at Wycliffe Hall, which is one of Oxford University's theological colleges, and that was an amazing experience as well. So a few different things happened in order, and I think after that, worked at the BBC for a while. Again, that's something we could talk about in more detail, because I think they were doing some things that were really good, and I think, but I found it also to be quite a limiting framework for what I was particularly interested in and felt led to do. So eventually, after exploring some other production companies, working some other places, I ended up starting up Owl in Space, and it was through reading the philosophy of Rudolf Otto, who is a legend and should be read. He wrote the book called The Idea of the Holy, which is from where we derive our name. And I also had 14 or so guys and girls praying for this thing, and the name emerged from those prayers. People gave me different parts. And so that was started about 6 years ago, and we incorporated 4.5 years ago. So that's the journey. And in terms of, you were asking a question about, standing up in public forums. I think for me, I became really interested in two schools of philosophy. So Pascal is probably my fave. If you've ever come across him, he wrote a brilliant book called Pensée, and his Pensée number 245, depending on how they're ordered. He actually wrote the book. He wrote them as thoughts, died, and then his family and others strung his thoughts together to form the book. But there are different orders of the book. So in my iteration, Pensée, thought number 245 is, there are three, depending on your translation, there are three ways to truth: reason, experience, and tradition. And to me, those three in combination, I think, make a compelling form of communication. That is it logically true? Is it logically coherent? So you might say, is it academic in that sense? Then second, is it experientially true? And that's where perhaps more storytelling comes in. And then finally, tradition, for him, that was built up knowledge. He was referring to the Bible specifically, but built up knowledge over time. Is there a theological or philosophical truth to it as well?
Yeah.
And I think good art or good communication, to me, or at least the communication I think is I want to make, and I think can be really powerful, integrates those three different spheres. Spheres of competency: logic, experience, tradition. And the second school of thought was Aristotle's rhetoric. I realized that Aristotle, he's a good guy, but also was advocated for things we definitely wouldn't want today. So I wouldn't say take everything that he says as good, but his book Rhetoric is really interesting, and he explores how arguments have logos, pathos, and ethos. Logos being, is it logically coherent? Pathos, is it experientially compelling? Does it match the human experience? Does it make me feel something? And then ethos, but by what authority do you say these words? And that's a really important thing. It's what the BBC do when they put a lab coat and goggles on a presenter, right? It's, that's the ethos. Someone's watching it and they're going, that guy knows what he's talking about. That girl knows what she's talking about. She's got lab goggles and a lab coat. And it's true. You can psychologically, we can, in other people's perception, jump up by 10 IQ points just by wearing a pair of glasses. So
I should have worn my glasses today. Why was I not doing that?
If you want some more authority, whap on some glasses.
That is so fascinating. And I love how you spoke about just those three kind of schools, the three forms of reasoning and just your schools of thought. And you often explore these questions, that intersection of science, technology, existentialism. Can you share a few examples of kind of some of the big questions that you're most fascinated by? And why do they matter to you? And you find ways to kind of speak about them through your work. But I'd love to hear that from your point of view.
Yeah, that's a great question, Carla. And so, oh God, golly, I'm going to quote another philosopher guy. So Camus, whether again you agree with his ideas or not, I think he had a really good way of working. For a period of time, he would think about a subject and then would output a number of different forms of communication. Perhaps a white paper, perhaps a little novel or a booklet, a pamphlet, perhaps it's a stage play, but he would output on the same subject, different mediums. And I think that's a really exciting way of working. So thinking deeply about a thing and then outputting different forms of communication on that subject. I think for me, the subjects that I've cycled through are quite varied. But I think, so let's start. So starting with the audience, I'm particularly interested in millennial, Gen Z, and maybe, with the alphas coming up now, I'm interested in what they care about. And if you look at the stats, and this stuff is replayed in the media, so I don't want to bore people, but, we have a very anxious generation coming up. And they are facing what they perceive to be, and I think it's not just perception, it is truth, a series of existential threats. And they're told potentially world-ending as we know it, existential threats. And on the macro scale, you've got all these different crises that we talk about. On the micro scale, you're seeing 1 in 4 are anxious about leaving the house. Yeah, that's huge. That feels huge. It is huge. And I think, so I'm particularly interested in these existential threats to life as we know it, and being able to speak into them in a way which both acknowledges the scale of the threat and can bring hope. Yeah. But a real hope. I think, I'm a Christian, and I do think I'm right. As in, I do think Christianity is right, and I think there are lots of reasons for that. One of which is that I don't think, in a very practical sense, a lot of the belief systems today don't provide a solid basis for hope. Yeah. I think humanism is a great thought experiment, and a lot of universities are now predominantly, even our churches are, as Harari would put it, even our churches are humanist. But humanism, at its core, in its essence, says, you effectively, you construct your own meaning, but finding an objective sense of meaning, or even perhaps a universal one, is something that you're not going to get. So you've got to settle for less.
Yeah.
And I think that's difficult because humans need, evidentially, we need meaning to live. I think we make basic, even basic assumptions about the world, like love is real. Like those basic assumptions about the world are not embodied in any other worldview, or rather, love means very different things. I think this inherently relational aspect of the universe is only found in a God that is in and of himself triune, relational, and clearly indicates through the incarnation the relationality of reality. And I think I think really we have to create these big universal objective senses of meaning in our lives in order to exist. And why is it not simply true? The simplest reason why that would be the case is it's actually true, rather than it being a mistake of a blind evolutionary process.
And this is it's so interesting to hear you talk about that, particularly in terms of these are the things that are really, I think, consuming so much thought for modern thought now, for our generations that are in the brackets that you've mentioned already. And I don't think that it's like that age, or it's almost like it's done kind of like a full circle. There's the age old thing everybody's looking for fruit of it as well, and looking for proof of it and a sense of meaning and purpose. And we're still there. Our means of trying to, I think, soothe it through distraction has become enhanced on crazy levels with what's available in terms of distraction. But that sense of satisfaction is still so deeply craved. And to hear that your motivation, your passion through your work and kind of the journey you've been on, whether it's been intellectual, academic, and now through your kind of creative processes with the work that you're doing in filmmaking, and you're challenging these spaces, you're challenging those questions again. And I think that desire hasn't changed, has it really? And I wondered, what have you experienced or encountered with people's response to the work that you're producing through your charity, through your films? Are you seeing the response of people kind of finding a little bit more resolution? How's that process been for you?
It's a great question. So just briefly, I guess I actually, funny enough, didn't actually touch on the subjects which I tend to work on. The first being an engineer and then doing philosophy. I think the first would be advanced technologies, whether it's VR, AI, and how those impact humanity, and the theological questions inherent within the debates around how we use those things. The second is that I'm really interested in aesthetics and beauty, and I guess with any art form, you inherently need an interest in that, and its limits of it's both its ability to convey ideas and its limits as well. I think the last kind of space is more hard-end philosophy and theology. So I've got we've actually done a couple of episodes recently on longing and hiddenness. And that's one of my wonderful team, Charlie Reader, who's a C.S. Lewis scholar, has put together some stuff on that. Has some really interesting ideas around big questions like why is, for people today, why is God hidden? If you're saying God is real, why is God hidden? And I don't want to trump Charlie's work, but one of his or take Charlie's work, but Charlie Reader, one of our researchers, he one of his ideas that he proved for his thesis at Oxford, he said that the longing that C.S. Lewis talks about in his work predates his conversion, which is a really, if true, which I think is true, is a very interesting idea, that we have longings that are unmet and they predate our coming to God, and they're things that we can really tap into. And I think as we're seeing, you may have seen Wunderman Thompson released a report recently. They duped this next age, the age of re-enchantment. That sounds very much like a space that Christian makers, creators can step into, right? We are re-enchanting and reinvigorating this and connecting with human longings, deep human longings that find their fulfillment ultimately in God, at least I believe. So those are the kind of subjects I've been focusing on. I think your question about what the response, I guess you could look at it in two different ways. One is kind of the scale of the response, and I think I'm always surprised at where the work goes and how well it does in certain spheres. So we made a film called Living Things, which explored whether meaning is something that, as Disney would say, meaning is something you look inside yourself to find, or whether meaning is something outside of ourselves that can be discovered. And it reads very much like a Tarkovsky film. It's a very odd kind of existentialist screenplay with David Jesse, who's the diplomat, main actor of The Diplomat. Absolutely amazing guy, really passionate Christian, really great guy. And that film did well in the UK, but it did really well. It got translated into Russian and did really well in Eastern Europe and Russia. And it got called a puzzle film. We kept on seeing this word come up again and again. And I realized quite quickly this was a theme, that the thing we'd made and the thing we kind of do make in this certain category, that I guess the dramas that I make are sort of puzzle films.
Yes.
They approach subjects that you can't necessarily have a didactic answer to. You can't say simply X is true and it is. They are ones that require, as Pascal would say, they need all of these elements to come together for you to truly understand what it is. You know, Jesus himself knew this very well, and that's why his storytelling was very varied. He knew that some subjects you could simply say a truth and we'd go, yeah, cool. Some subjects he would need to express through a story, a culturally relevant story. You need that variety. And I think for me, seeing that film do well opened my eyes to, there are certain cultural ways of understanding that work well in some contexts and not in others. We did a film series called The Future of Cities in Hong Kong that did well. It was with Hong Kong University and looked at cities 5, 10, 30 and 100 years into the future, and looks at how AI will transform how we live with each other, how we live with, how we build, especially for this crazy population growth. So that's another, if you've got an environmental existential threat, you've got an AI existential threat, you've got this population growth existential threat. Some people think it isn't a threat at all. Some people are terrified by it. But however you look at it, the way in which we live is changing. We are moving into cities and moving out of the rural space, and looking at how mega and hyper cities are emerging. Hyper cities are enormous, like 100 million people in one city. That's mad. So that series did well, and I think it was partly because it accessed some of these, quite big questions, but through these intimate stories. So seeing them do well at scale is exciting. I think, though, perhaps where I get most excited is when I see someone's watched it and I hear what they think, or how it's changed how they feel or think about something. So I'm currently running an alpha group. I won't give you any names. Derek, no, joking, it's not Derek. No, he's not. There's no Derek in my group, for reference. But sorry, Derek. Each of them. So it came maybe the fourth episode of Alpha, fourth session. I think we were talking, and it got around to me talking about what I did, and my group went away, unbeknownst to me, and all of them watched this film that we've just put out, which is on embodiment and virtual reality. So it simply asks the question, is having a body a fundamental part of human existence, or is it something we can do away with? And the range of responses really blew me away. I think one, it is again an existentialist screenplay, and it is it can be a bit harrowing to watch.
Mm,
And I think it's not deliberately shock factor,
yeah.
but there is definite trigger warning. But for them, watching it left them with aware of a hole. So one of them said, aware of a hole that I had in myself, something that was missing. For another, they thought, oh my gosh, is heaven going to be like that? Would heaven look like this? In which case, I don't want this Christian stuff. And the fun thing is, they'd actually interpreted it in the opposite way in which I'd intended to. It accessed the right question, but interpreted it in the opposite way in which I was intending it to.
Wow.
And I think for me, being able to that then leading on to a conversation where I said, no, actually, heaven isn't this disembodied cloud harpy type thing. It is I love C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce. Sorry, I'm fanboying, but it's such a great book about, he creates this vision of heaven where it's more painful than, it's more physically painful for people who have going on a day trip there. It's painful how real it is. Wow. And I love that idea that the heaven is more, not less real. I think a fear is that we have this kind of disembodied existence for eternity, and it's quite the opposite.
That's really fascinating. And I have to ask, when you are going down these rabbit holes, if I may say, of these big questions through your work, and you're taking this on as a project, and I imagine, in which ways have you found that these experiences, when you're writing, you're directing, or presenting these works, and you're creating them, what have you kind of learned about yourself? Because I imagine it's never one way, isn't it? When we're engaging with huge questions like this, and we're engaging with the creative processes of trying to relay the story, frame the story, build it for somebody else to receive it, we are always impacted somehow. And I would love to hear in some of the ways, if you could share how that has impacted you.
That's really helpful. It's a good question. And at the risk of sounding okay, I'm going to check my word here. Can I use the word Ponzi? Is that a bad word? Yeah. Okay. At the risk of sounding a little Ponzi, I think part of doing art that really cuts to the quick is, this is going to sound very Kierkegaard. Again, this sounds Ponzi, but it's being able to look at the void and look at the difficulty of human existence as much as you can, and then being able to respond to it. And I think if you were to take Fear and Trembling, which is Kierkegaard's arguably his greatest work, if you were to take that book, he talks about Abraham's journey as being a very lonely one. And I think maybe I just wanted to tap into something we discussed before the podcast. We started recording the podcast. That I think there are many Christians who are working in this space, whether artists, whether producers, whatever we're talking about, who feel lonely. And I certainly think that facing the questions and really doing the work and sitting in them can feel quite lonely. I think especially because I think that much of the world is a little bit distracted. Instead of it's easier to do the distracting work. And I'm by the way, I'm not saying that I face existential questions all day every day. I more like I love distracting myself with all the various things like Nintendo Switch and the best console, by the way. I love distracting myself, but I think there is something about facing that stuff which can feel quite lonely. And I think it is really important that we find other people that are doing it, that are doing the hard graft work of thinking this through and trying to make good art. That doesn't just toe the line of the day, but tries to be experimental and to push into risky new spaces. So finding friends in a community that think that way can be very, very helpful. And And I have found that with a few of the people I work with.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's so encouraging for anybody that's kind of on the similar journey to yourself, or in any space that they're occupying where they happen to be storytellers, is to find your tribe a little bit, really, I think is what you're alluding to. And I think that's so important. And how have you found kind of like your faith has developed through these projects, through these really hugely like faith grappling, question based areas of your creativity? How's your faith kind of developed through that, or been impacted by that, if I may ask?
Yeah, that's a great question. Can I just jump back? So I guess this your podcast, Carla, you are part of a network of people who do this kind of thing. So one, I guess at this point, I'm just encouraging, if someone's listening and thinking, I need a tribe.
Absolutely.
Guess what? You got some tribe. Another tribe. So if you're really, really thinking and grappling with, say, apologetics, or thinking about cultural engagement, there's a few organizations that do it. I am part-time. I'm working as the creative director at an organization called OCCA. That's the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. And they do training for people who are thinking about this kind of work. And I've encouraged friends to go before. I myself went. I encouraged friends to go because it is very helpful. You get a rigorous theological training, and you get to think about these questions with other people. And I think that community building is incredibly valuable because you're finding other people of a similar tribe again. And I would offer friendship as well if you guys want to hang out. I think I can't be friends with everyone, although I would love to be. But if you want to chat, again, I'm really up for emails or whatever. And if, I don't know, Carla, if you share emails around, but if people are thinking about these things as well, I'm very open to someone getting in contact.
That'll be great. Thank you.
But in terms of faith, then how has it grown? I take my name quite seriously. Like Thomas, I think I was born a Thomas. The name was an emergent as opposed to given property. Probably, I think Thomas is as the doubter. Well, I mean, it means the twin, but he is the doubter. And I think I would say that a lot of my faith journey has been doubt and faith. And it is through the crucible of doubt that I think my faith has grown significantly stronger. And I think I am more fired up today than I was when I started my walk. And I don't know, I think some Christians would say that isn't the case. And I would say it's facing probably the things, the little niggles. You're like, oh, I'm not sure about that. It's saying, giving that thing to God and really facing that doubt. Because I think, Jesus isn't afraid of our doubts. He actively encourages them. And I think it's a really good thing. Doubting in the right community as well, finding the right people who can actually help you through it. So it's not just like, I must go into a little cocoon and doubt in my own little headspace. It's like finding the right community to do doubting well in as well. Because I think it is really important to face those questions head on. And I do really, truly believe that there are good answers. And I wouldn't be sitting here today if I didn't. I truly believe with all integrity, there are good answers to those questions. Maybe you have different questions to me and I haven't thought about those answers, or the responses, in which case I would love to hear them. But my faith is stronger than it's ever been. And I think that's partly about taking doubt very seriously.
That's amazing. And really refreshing to hear that. Yeah. Really refreshing to hear that. I this has been such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much, Tom. Like you've shed light on so many things that I think we're not normally quite comfortable always to engage with, when like your absolute embrace of existential questions and about what is it that people need, and am I willing to meet them where they are, and not be afraid, because that's unknown. That's sometimes a dark space, but God can still be God of the darkness and meet us there if we allow ourselves, like you say, in the right environment or the right tools of engagement to go there. It can be so fruitful and so enriching and it's the satisfaction that some will need, and are we providing something for that need? It's part of that Great Commission, I think you said earlier, which I think so true. We're rounding up the conversation, and I really wanted to kind of get your thoughts on just some final things, but this has just been so enriching. So thank you. If you could give advice to someone
Thanks, Carla.
with your background or similar background in science and philosophy that also wants to break into creative fields and also engage with some of the tough stuff that you do, what would you tell them?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say that my journey of coming to start Owl in Space, it didn't make much sense to me. There were lots of disparate elements, like people pastoring, engineering, and like the sciences, and then theology and philosophy, and they weren't. And then mission, it didn't really make sense. And I think in God's wisdom, he had me do those things and really focus on those things instead of kind of dallying around doing all of them at once. Focus on them in turn, and then integrate them. Yeah. I would say I'm 35. I don't know if I look it. I do moisturize. If you're in your 20s, really taking the opportunity to think around and do a few different things and push into them, I think that was helpful for me. It gave me the opportunity to see what was out there, see what I liked and what I didn't like about certain industries or certain ways of thinking. And then I think really pray. I think God's. There was one point in my life when I was pastor in Holy Trinity in Cambridge. I was praying about whether I should become a vicar, and I said, God, should I be a vicar? And I did that every day for the 2 years that I was there. I think without fail, some days I would lie on my face for like an hour because I wasn't getting a response or a clear direction. And I felt encouraged to read the book of Numbers, and that might sound weird, and it didn't make sense to me at the time. And I think reading the book of Numbers, it was a book in which there were some elements of the Israelite people that just had to be cut off, and that's a very difficult book to read. And I'm not suggesting you apply this as a general rule, but for me, reading that book was very powerful in terms of thinking about character transformation. And I think for me, character preceded competency. So when I said, what should I do, Lord? He said, who should you be? And I think I would say, don't just ask the question, what should I do? Because it can feel like very overwhelming. There's so many things you could possibly do in this life with this limited number of years. Ask the question, who should I be? As well as what should I do? And I think who should I be probably then leads nicely into what should I do, because it is an outflow then of your relationship with God, rather than it being I must do the things and your character doesn't live up to it. And maybe, maybe right at the outset, it's a good thing to think about character, because we've seen many ministries fail over the years, in recent years, very, very publicly. And thinking carefully about what character do I need to build to exist in certain spaces or to be competent in certain fields. I think it's a very, very important question, because it'll mean that you can sustainably do what you do and do it well. Yeah.
I absolutely love that. That is such a beautiful, I think, and succinct way to describe what we should be aiming for, whether it's on the journey of discovery and we don't know yet, or it's asking the big questions of what am I here for? And I think out of the character space, out of that development space, is really going to outflow, I think, what you said, and materialize what we're supposed to be doing through purpose. Tom, this has been such an amazing conversation. You have absolutely blessed us with your time and your wisdom and just your story. And I want to thank you so much for that. If you would like to connect with Tom, we will have his connecting details by LinkedIn and links that are available, website. Just please make connections. This is exactly what this is about. It's bringing people together. We're not alone. Find your tribe. And it's been amazing to have Tom with us today. Thank you so much for joining us at Faith in
Thank
Media,
you,
Tom.
Carla.
It's been such a blessing. Yeah. Wishing you all the best with the rest of your endeavors. Thank you so much.
God bless you. Bye, 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 bye.
You've been listening to Faith in Media with Carla Adebekin. Make sure you catch our episodes and hit subscribe. Please share and leave us a comment. Christians in Media is a UK charity that supports, encourages and inspires Christians from across the ever-changing media landscape. Find out more at www.christiansinmedia.co.uk and connect with us via our socials.